What if I told you that one single naval battle could strand an entire army, seal the fate of Napoleon Bonaparte, and literally alter the course of history? Well, today we're diving into exactly that, the Battle of the Nile.
But let's start at the end. I want you to picture this. It's 10 o'clock at night, August 1st, 1798. Out of nowhere, a massive cataclysmic explosion just rips through the sky over Egypt. The world's most powerful warship has just been completely obliterated. The blast is so huge it's heard 20 miles away. This single, terrifying moment was the climax of a battle that was about to change everything.
So, you have to be asking, how did it come to this? How did one destroyed fleet end up trapping the most brilliant general of the age? And how did it kickstart a whole century of British dominance on the seas? Well, that's the incredible story we're going to unpack. To get it, we've got to rewind a bit, back to early 1798. Revolutionary France is on a roll. They've pretty much beaten all of their enemies on the continent. But there's just one problem. One great big rival left standing. Great Britain.
This created, a kind of strategic standoff. France had this unstoppable army, the best in Europe. But Britain had the Royal Navy, the undisputed masters of the ocean. So a direct invasion of England? Yeah, that was seen as way too risky.
So this young, incredibly ambitious general, Napoleon Bonaparte, comes up with this wild, audacious plan. He says, look, instead of attacking Britain head-on, let's hit them where it really hurts, their wallet. If he could invade and take over Egypt, he could create a base to mess with British trade and maybe even launch an attack on India, the jewel in their imperial crown. Now, the sheer scale of this expedition was just mind-boggling. We're talking about a literal floating city of hundreds of ships carrying almost 40,000 soldiers. And leading this whole armada was the colossal flagship, the L'Orient, a 124-gun behemoth, maybe the most powerful warship on the entire planet. And here's the kicker. It was so top secret that almost nobody, not even most of the soldiers on board, knew where they were actually going.
So the British knew this massive French fleet was out there somewhere. They just had no idea where it was headed. The job of hunting it down and destroying it, that fell to one man, a 39-year-old, one-eyed, one-armed rear admiral named Horatio Nelson.
And what happens next is this incredibly tense, 3-month-long cat-and-mouse game all across the Mediterranean. Nelson is just chasing shadows, always one step behind, or in one case, a step ahead. Get this, on the night of June 22nd, the two fleets passed within a few miles of each other, but a thick fog meant they were completely invisible to one another. Nelson's fleet was actually faster, so he got to Alexandria, Egypt first, found nothing, and totally frustrated, he left just days before the French finally showed up.
Now you gotta understand, Nelson was at a huge disadvantage here. A bad storm had scattered his scouting ships, his frigates. Without these eyes of the fleet, he was basically sailing blind, and he was getting incredibly frustrated. It really was just pure luck and sheer determination that brought him back to the coast of Egypt on August 1st.
And then, around 2:30 in the afternoon, his lookouts spot them. A forest of French masts anchored in Aboukir Bay. Now, most commanders would have played it safe, waited till morning to attack an enemy dug into a strong position. But Nelson wasn't most commanders. He ordered an immediate attack, sailing straight into the setting sun.
The French commander, Vice Admiral Bruys, he was feeling pretty confident. His ships were anchored in this powerful battle line, with shallow waters protecting one side. He figured any attack had to come from the sea, right where his cannons were pointed. He was so sure he was safe that a lot of his sailors were actually ashore digging wells.
But Bruys made one tiny, fatal mistake. He left just enough room between his first ship and the shallows. It was a tiny detail, but for a tactical genius like Nelson, a tiny detail was a massive opportunity.
The captain of the lead British ship, a guy named Thomas Foley, spotted that gap, and he just went for it, taking a huge risk of running his ship aground. The plan was absolutely brilliant. Foley's group snuck through that gap and attacked the French from their unprotected side, while Nelson's group attacked from the front, just like the French expected. Suddenly, the French were trapped, getting hammered from both sides at the same time. Their strong defense had become a death trap.
So the battle starts as the sun goes down and it just rages through the night. Imagine the scene. It's completely dark, except for the light of the full moon, the constant flash of hundreds of cannons, and pretty soon, the glow of burning French ships.
Right in the center of the French line was the grand prize, the massive flagship L'Orient. With 124 guns, it was an absolute floating fortress, and it quickly became the focus of a ferocious attack from several British ships.
A fire breaks out on the flagship's deck. It's fueled by flammable stuff like paint and tar that were just lying around, and it spreads fast, heading right for the ship's powder magazine. And then, at 10 p.m., it happens. The Lorient just vaporizes in a deafening explosion, throwing debris, treasure, and bodies high into the air. The blast was so powerful that for a moment, the entire battle just stopped. Everyone was stunned into silence.
The human cost was just horrific. The French admiral Bruys, earlier in the fight, he'd had both his legs blown off, but he refused to be taken below deck. Instead, he had his men tie him to an armchair on the deck so he could keep commanding his ship right up until a second cannonball killed him. Of the 1,000 men on the Lorient, almost all of them died in that explosion.
When the sun finally rose the next day, the scene in the bay was one of just total devastation. This wasn't just a victory for the British, it was a complete and total annihilation of the enemy.
I mean, the numbers here tell the whole story. The British didn't lose a single one of their main battleships. The French, they lost 11 out of 13. British casualties were less than 900. French losses were in the thousands. It was one of the most lopsided victories in the entire history of naval warfare.
And the consequences were huge. And they were immediate. In a single night, Napoleon's whole army was trapped in Egypt, completely cut off from France. The victory gave other European countries the confidence to team up against France again, and it really marked the beginning of a century where the British Royal Navy would rule the waves completely unchallenged.
You know, even Nelson, who'd been wounded in the head during the battle, was just in awe of what had happened. Looking out at all the destruction, he said, "Victory is not a name strong enough for such a scene." He was basically saying the word victory didn't even begin to cover it.
And historians today agree. Many, like Stephen Maffeo, call it the single most decisive naval battle of the entire age of sail. Some even argue it was more strategically important than Nelson's more famous victory at Trafalgar a few years later.
So it all boils down to this one battle that changed absolutely everything. But it leaves you with this fascinating question, right? Think back to that night in June, with the two fleets passing each other like ships in the night, literally, hidden by that thick fog. If that fog hadn't been there, the battle would have been fought on the open sea, and who knows how it would have ended. It makes you wonder, if it weren't for a little bit of bad weather, would the world have ever even known an Emperor Napoleon?